Tantor Audio, a division of Recorded Books, presents Raven's Prey by Jayne Krentz, narrated by Amy Mcfadden. Chapter 1. Perhaps he was merely an adventuresome tourist who had drifted into the obscure little Mexican town in search of some action. Perhaps he had wandered into the cantina for the same reason she had, to get a bite to eat and have a bottle of the local beer. Perhaps he was a perfectly innocuous male who, when he realized there was another North American in the cantina, would come over to her table to chat. Then again, perhaps he was her executioner. My God, Honor Knight thought bitterly, I'm really getting paranoid. She forced down another swallow of the robust beer she had been nursing for the last hour, and deliberately looked away from the line of men who were standing and leaning with varying degrees of casualness against the bar. That was all she needed now, she chastised herself. She mustn't lose her grip on reality. She must not succumb to genuine paranoia, or life would become intolerable. She really would go out of her mind with fear. But the image of the stranger, as he hooked a booted foot over the bottom rung of the bar, would not be banished simply because she chose to look away. It was natural that he would stand out in this crowd, Honor assured herself. He was the only other gringo in the room besides herself. Standing at the bar, even lounging against it on one elbow as he was, he topped the Mexican men around him by several inches in most cases. And while the other men were dressed in the dusty, loose-fitting trousers and shirts of poor, hard-working farmers, the stranger was dark and hard and lean, in a pair of black jeans and a black cotton shirt. His clothes weren't the only thing that were dark about him, and that made him seem a part of the shadowy night outside. In the brief glance she had allowed herself, Honor had been aware of the deep black shade of his hair. There were subtle highlights of iron gray in the heavy pelt, which indicated the stranger at the bar would soon be staring his 40th birthday in the face. Even without the iron in his hair, Honor would have been able to guess his age from the unforgiving hardness of his features. Uneasily, she allowed her eyes to slide once again over his profile. He had ordered tequila, not beer, she realized, watching from her sheltered table as he sipped the clear liquid in the small glass he held. How much longer before his roving gaze discovered her against the back wall? She hadn't yet confronted that gaze directly, and, based on what she'd seen of the rest of him, Honor didn't particularly want to do so. There was a ruthless, predatory quality about this man which disturbed her on several levels. It was there in the hawkish nose, the grimly set mouth, and the fiercely etched lines of his face. Somehow he seemed aloof and coldly removed from the scene around him, as if he didn't particularly need human companionship. Determinedly, Honor picked up her fork and took another bite of the corn tamale she'd been eating when the newcomer had walked through the door a few minutes earlier. There was nothing to fear, she told herself firmly. After all, she thought on a note of half-hysterical humor, she'd seen plenty of pictures of professional hitmen, and none of them had ever been wearing jeans and boots. They always seemed to be attired in suits that bulged in the wrong places, and they tended to speak in East Coast accents. Not that she'd heard the stranger when he'd ordered his tequila, but somehow Honor didn't think he would have an Eastern accent, more likely a Southwestern drawl. No. She wasn't going to give in to the lure of paranoia. She had to keep a realistic perspective on her present situation, or she would become a gibbering idiot. Honor swallowed another sip of the warm beer and resolved to keep her head. It was the only way to survive. The stranger was probably from Texas or Arizona. Perhaps he had business here in this Mexican village, or perhaps he'd merely come south looking for some amusement. One way or another, he wasn't a threat to her. He couldn't be. And then she glanced up again and found his night-dark gaze on her. For an instant, everything in the smoky, too-warm cantina seemed to freeze, including Honor's insides. She had known instinctively that she didn't want to meet his eyes directly, but instinct hadn't prepared her for the devastating experience when it finally did occur. She had been half expecting a predatory sensuality in those eyes, Honor realized as her throat went dry. Casual, masculine lust would have fit with the man and the scene in which he found himself. After all, men who wandered into smoke-filled taverns the world over were usually looking for liquor and a willing woman. But there was no sign of even the most superficial desire in his gaze. If there was no sensuality in his eyes, neither was there any other emotion she could name. No curiosity, no dislike, no anger, no expectation, no friendliness, no resentment, no humor, nothing. Just the chilling, totally self-contained, non-reflective gleam of a beast of prey. Honor had never seen such a total lack of emotion in another human being in her entire life. In a very real sense, it was far more frightening than if the man had simply pulled a gun and aimed it at her. Then he picked up his glass of tequila and started toward her. In that moment, she realized he knew exactly who she was. The panic threatened to choke her. It welled up from the pit of her stomach and literally immobilized her limbs. Desperately, she fought to keep it under control. It was one feeling that definitely would not aid her now. Unfortunately, she couldn't think of anything that would help her. She had no choice but to play out her role and pray that the presence of so many local townspeople there in the cantina would lend some protection. Did professional killers have the cold, emotionless eyes of a hawk? It seemed far too likely that they did. Honor Knight. Her name was a statement, an identification, not a question, and there was a slight southwestern drawl in the low, gravelly intonation of his voice. The dark stranger sat down across from her without bothering with the formality of asking permission. He moved with an easy, smoothly coordinated energy, which suggested controlled strength and physical prowess. When Honor made no response, continuing to sit utterly still staring at him, the man sipped again at his tequila and then asked calmly, "Are you going to make this easy on yourself, or are we going to do things the hard way?" He wasn't armed, Honor told herself frantically. At least not with a gun. It would have bulged somewhere against the fabric of the sleek-fitting jeans and shirt, wouldn't it? Perhaps he used a knife. Or perhaps her imagination had truly run amok. Maybe he wasn't there to kill her. Above all else, she must keep her head and not panic. Knowing that her life depended on staying calm, Honor made herself exchange a level glance with the man across the table. She stifled a shiver as the impenetrable darkness of his gaze met hers. "I'm sorry," she began stiffly, "but you must have mistaken me for someone else. I don't know you, and I don't know who it is you think I am, but I would appreciate it if you would leave me alone." She tried to make her voice as cold as his eyes. He watched her silently for a moment, and she could almost feel him assessing and cataloging the sum of her features. Good God! How detailed a description had he been given? Could she bluff her way through this? After all, there was nothing all that remarkable about her looks, was there? She was 29, but age could be deceptive in a woman hovering between her 20s and her 30s, especially to a man. Her hair was a dark amber brown, but he would probably have been told she was simply a brunette. There were a lot of brunettes in the world, especially in Mexico, and hazel eyes were surely almost as common. Dressed as she was in jeans and a white t-shirt, her slender figure with its small breasts and gently flaring hips must have appeared similar to the body shapes of countless other women in the world. "Honor Knight," the man said again, and then reached into his shirt pocket and drew out a color photograph. Deliberately, he placed it on the table between them, and then he waited. Honor went even colder. In helpless fascination, she stared down at the picture of herself. There, caught by the camera's eye, were all the elements that were so hard to describe verbally, the elements that went together to make each human being distinctive and unique. In her case, that meant not just hazel eyes, but wide, intelligent eyes of a complex shade somewhere between green and gold. It meant not just brunette hair, but a heavy amber mane, which, although she had recently cut it to shoulder length, still had a characteristic wave even when worn in a clip at the nape of her neck, as it was that evening. It meant a mouth that was soft and, in the photo, smiling with feminine warmth. It meant a faintly tip-tilted nose, a proud lift to the chin. It meant no real beauty in the accepted sense, but rather an impression of sensitivity, intelligence, and a hint of vulnerability. It meant, Honor realized, disaster. The man could be in no doubt whatsoever that he had found the right woman. Slowly, she lifted her eyes from the damning photograph.
"There is also a scar,"
the stranger went on coolly,
"on the left wrist."
He reached across the table and caught her hand before she could hide it in her lap.
"A mark left over from a botched suicide attempt, I'm told."
She flinched as he captured her hand and exposed the delicate skin on the inside of her wrist. The angry red scar was clearly visible, even in the smoky light.
"A rather badly handled effort,"
the man observed, his touch remote and dispassionate.
"You either didn't want to do a good job, or else you must have used a pretty dull knife."
He released her hand, and Honor shoved her fingers into her lap to hide the trembling in them.
"My guess is you probably didn't set out to really take your own life. You probably just used the attempt as a means of getting the kind of attention you seem to need."
"Who are you?" Honor whispered.
"I'm the man who's been sent to bring you home,"
he said quietly, lifting his tequila glass again. The dark, unfathomable eyes went over her stark expression with a total lack of sympathy or any other emotion.
"My name is Judd Raven."
Raven. The name fit him, Honor thought bitterly. A bird of prey, a bird of menace. That explained the eyes, the lack of emotion. The connotations of danger and ill fate that surrounded the word Raven were not lost on her. In her lap, her nails began to eat into the palm of her hand, but her chin stayed proudly lifted. "Home?" she questioned grimly. There was some cause for hope, she told herself. If he had been sent to fetch her rather than to kill her, she still had some chance.
"Your father and your brother are damned worried about you,"
Raven said musingly.
"But then I suppose you know that, don't you? That's why you're here in the first place."
Her father and brother? How did they know where I was?
"They don't. Not precisely. They only knew the general region of Mexico into which you disappeared. They don't speak Spanish themselves, so they realized they didn't have much chance of tracing you. That's why they hired me. I've been tracking you for almost a week. You're a foreigner in this country, and people remembered the nice gringa with the big hazel eyes and the lousy Spanish. It took some legwork, but here I am."
"My father and brother," Honor said carefully, "sent you to bring me home." He raised his glass in mocking acknowledgement of her apparent slow-wittedness.
"Are you disappointed? Would you rather one of them had come with me to look for you? Afraid you won't get as much comfort and attention from me as you would from them?"
"No."
"What's the matter, Honor? You've achieved almost everything you wanted, haven't you? A lot of time and worry has been spent on you, and that's the main thing you were after, wasn't it? This little adventure worked even better than the suicide attempt."
She ignored that, leaning forward to stare at him with wide, searching eyes. "Just tell me the truth. Have you really been sent to bring me home, or have you come to kill me?" He considered the question.
"What do you think?"
She blinked and then sat back in her chair, taking in a deep, steadying breath. "I think that if you'd come to kill me, I'd probably be dead by now." Which was the truth, she realized. This man wouldn't sit around chatting with his target. He'd get the job over with the efficient cruelty of a hunting bird. Raven watched the play of emotion across her tightly drawn features. There was a long silence, and then he said quietly,
"They told me you had a hell of an imagination, that you were borderline paranoid, according to your doctor."
Honor's vulnerable mouth twisted. "I can just imagine what they told you." She stared down at her nearly empty bottle of beer. She had to think, had to find some logical way of dealing with this situation. But it had been almost impossible lately to think logically at all. There had been too much fear, and her imagination had been so damn active. That wonderful, vividly romantic imagination that had always set her apart from her practical, restrained, disapproving family had proven to have a dark side, one which was capable of painting her dreams with nightmarish colors and her daytime thoughts with fear. Well, there was no point dwelling on that now. At the moment, she had to force herself to think very pragmatically indeed. Judd Raven, apparently, was only a hired hand. Or was he merely allowing her to think that so she wouldn't complicate matters by running screaming through the village? "Do you always believe everything you're told, Mr. Raven?"
"No. Sometimes I don't believe anything I'm told."
"That sounds as if you might be suffering from a bit of paranoia yourself," she challenged wryly.
"I've always felt that a certain degree of paranoia was a useful survival trait," he allowed calmly. "Keeps a man alert."
"Or a woman."
"But in this case,"
he continued easily,
"it doesn't much matter what I believe. I'm just being paid to do a job. I learned a long time ago that it's bad policy to ask too many unnecessary questions."
She bit her lip and watched him broodingly. "What if I said I don't want to return to the States, Mr. Raven?"
"I'd say you don't have a whole hell of a lot of choice."
If he was simply an innocent employee sent to fetch her back, perhaps she could reason with him, Honor told herself resolutely. He might have a policy of not asking questions because he didn't always like the answers. If he cared about answers, there might be a chance that he still retained some semblance of a conscience. And if there was a small streak of morality or honor in him somewhere, she might be able to appeal to it. It was her only hope. "Mr. Raven, I am 29 years old. I am not a runaway child. I have the right to go where I please, and at the moment I choose to stay here in Mexico. You have no right to try to take me back to the States."
"I think,"
he said very politely,
"that you might as well call me Judd. Something tells me we're going to get to know each other fairly well tonight."
Her sense of shock was plain. There was no point in hiding it. "What's that supposed to mean?" she bit out, a new kind of fear rising beneath the old, familiar variety she had been living with for so long. There was still no sign of masculine desire in those dark eyes, but perhaps this man's emotions were so cold that even lust took the form of a chilled passion instead of a heated one. The thought was frightening.
"It means,"
he said calmly,
"that the dirt road I had to use for a landing strip on the other side of the village isn't going to work as a runway at night. I'm not about to risk my neck or my plane trying to take off without being able to see a damn thing. We'll leave in the morning. So, I'll be spending the night with you."
Honor shook her head dazedly. "No, I'm not going to leave with you in the morning, and I'm not going to spend the night with you. Get out of here, Judd Raven. You don't know what you've gotten yourself involved in. You have no conception of the size of the mess. Get out while you still can, and leave me behind."
"I don't buy the paranoia act. Your father and brother might believe it, and God knows a professional shrink will believe almost anything a patient wants him to believe. But I'm just a hard-working guy who's seen neurotic, spoiled females before. What you probably needed instead of a psychiatrist during your formative years was the application of your father's belt to your backside. But that's his problem. I've only been hired to take you home, not straighten out your self-centered, childish approach to life."
His mouth kicked upward at the corners in a grimly amused expression. It was the first sign of any kind of emotion Honor had seen in him, and she didn't like it.
"If I'd been hired to straighten you out, I would have charged a hell of a lot more for the job than I'm going to get just to fly you home."
"Just how much are you being paid to kidnap me?"
"Kidnap is a strong word,"
he noted mildly. "It's the only word that applies, given the fact that I'm not going to go with you willingly," she shot back.
"A couple of $1,000 plus expenses?"
He gave her the answer to her initial question and overlooked the accusation that had followed. A couple of thousand? Is that all? Was that all a human life was worth these days? But then he hadn't been paid to kill her, only to deliver her to the executioners. "What kind of man are you, to do this sort of thing for a living?" she hissed.
"The kind of man who works for a living?"
He appeared totally unperturbed by the taunt. Was there any way of getting through that wall of indifference? Could anything reach this man? Money. If he was doing this for money, perhaps that was the way to get through to him. A few crucial seconds ticked past as Honor considered the possibility. "A couple of thousand," she repeated carefully. He nodded in polite agreement, saying nothing. "A couple of thousand plus expenses," Honor went on, striving to sound as cool and cynical as he did. "I'll double that, if you just go away and leave me here." He was silent for a long moment, and she couldn't even begin to tell what he was thinking.
"They told me you probably had some money with you,"
he finally said. "Everything that was in my bank account," she assured him quickly, daring to let a spark of hope ignite. "All in cash."
"And all belonging to your father,"
Raven concluded bluntly.
"Hell, lady, at your age, don't you think it's time you started working for a living instead of sponging off your family? Maybe if you went home and got a job, you could learn a little self-discipline, start putting your life in order."
He sounded as if the suggested therapy was only of academic interest to him.
"Or maybe what you need is marriage to a man who won't let you get away with playing your stupid head games. It's obvious your father has handled you all wrong, but the right kind of husband might be able to undo some of the damage and make an adult woman out of you."
"Oh, for God's sake!" she gasped, struggling against the defeating knowledge that she didn't know how to deal with Judd Raven. So much depended on finding the key to this stranger, and there was so little time. "Are you interested in my offer or not?" He shook his head briefly.
"Not. Don't look so crushed. It was a good try. It's just that I already have a job, and accepting your offer would have created a definite conflict of interest. Don't you think?"
"I'll triple the offer," she tried desperately.
"Forget it. Finish your meal, and let's go to your place. We've got a long flight ahead of us in the morning, and I want to get some sleep."
He downed the last of the tequila and sat waiting with the patience of a hunter. "I seem to have lost my appetite. Listen to me, Judd Raven. If you won't accept my money because you feel it would put you in conflict with my father's offer, then you must have some sort of business ethics."
"Business ethics sounds like a fancy term for holding up my end of a deal,"
he drawled, that faint, frightening amusement lacing his words.
"You can call it what you want, but doing the job I've agreed to do is just good business, period. A pilot doesn't need a reputation for unreliability."
"That's what you do for a living? I mean, when you're not kidnapping people?" she demanded. More and more it was beginning to look like Judd Raven was merely a tool. If she could somehow render him ineffective, she might have a chance.
"I run a small ferrying outfit in New Mexico,"
he explained with a shrug.
"When a businessman in Africa or South America or God knows where orders a small private plane from the U.S., he commissions an outfit like mine to fly the aircraft to wherever he is. You don't just pack up a Cessna or a Beechcraft and ship it halfway around the world, you know. It's got to be flown to where it's needed."
"I gather ferrying planes doesn't pay very well, or you wouldn't be obliged to take on outside jobs like kidnapping," Honor snapped impatiently.
"No,"
he agreed gently.
"It doesn't pay all that well. So I sometimes supplement my income with outside jobs, as you put it. Are you finished with that tamale yet?"
Honor looked down at the half-eaten tamale, knowing she was never going to finish it. Her stomach was twisted into one large knot. "Judd," she began evenly, still focusing on the tamale, "will you at least listen to my side of the story?" He reached across the table and closed iron fingers around her wrist.
"You can tell me your side of the story on the way back to Arizona. Come on, Honor. It's getting late. Let's go."
"No, please." But he was already on his feet, drawing her up beside him. Throwing a handful of pesos down on the table, Judd Raven turned and led Honor out of the smoky cantina and into the balmy Mexican night. Instinctively, Honor tried to fight the steady, inexorable grasp on her wrist, but he simply ignored her efforts as he started down the dusty street. After a moment, it was obvious he knew where she lived, and Honor felt a new rush of despair. He must have asked about her before locating her in the cantina. "Won't you at least listen to me?" she pleaded as he led her down the nearly silent street to the small cottage she had rented from the woman who owned the cantina. Aside from the crowd in the tavern, there was very little sign of life at this hour. This was a farming community, and most people were in bed early. The lack of electricity in many of the homes did not encourage late hours either.
"In the morning,"
Judd sighed.
"I really don't feel like listening to fairy tales tonight. I've had a long, hard day."
Something about the way he said that told Honor there was no hope of ever getting him to listen to her side of the matter. As far as Judd Raven was concerned, he had accepted a job and would see it through to the end. It undoubtedly suited him to know as little as possible about the details of a situation like this, Honor realized bitterly. He simply wanted to collect his pay and go on to the next job. If there was no hope of talking her way out of the situation, then she really had no alternative but to use the gun. The thought of the deadly little weapon lying in the drawer beside her bed brought little comfort. In her heart of hearts, she had prayed she would never have to use it. What was it going to be like, aiming that thing at another human being, especially a human being who was only a tool, not the real source of danger? Would she really be able to pull the trigger if Judd Raven challenged her? He didn't seem like the kind of man who would bluff very easily. But she had no choice. She had only herself to rely on. If Honor didn't defend herself, no one would. Lifting her chin, she straightened her shoulders and began to deliberately summon the kind of resolve it would take to remove the wicked little gun from the bedside drawer. Her cottage was one of the more comfortable structures in town. It was blessed with a naked light bulb, which dangled precariously from the ceiling, a very old bathroom, and a small electric burner. Other than the bathroom, there was only one room, which served as both living room and bedroom. The few pieces of furniture were threadbare and dilapidated.
"You've been living here for 4 weeks?"
Judd asked as he stepped through the door and scanned the stark interior.
"I should think you'd be more than ready to go home by now."
"Nobody's asking you to spend the night here," she muttered tightly, her eyes straying quickly to the nightstand beside the single bed. "Perhaps you'd rather sleep in your plane," she added icily.
"No thanks. I've slept in worse places than this. I just have a hard time imagining you being content here. It's hardly Acapulco."
"But then you don't really know me, do you?" She shot back, freeing her wrist to walk restlessly across the small room. She stood staring out the uncurtained window, her back toward the tall, dark man behind her. "You don't know me at all." There was a strange silence, and then Judd said quietly,
"You forget I've not only been told a great deal about you, but I've been looking at that damned photograph your father gave me for a solid week."
She swung around angrily. "The photograph? What the hell can you learn from a picture?"
"Not much, apparently,"
he retorted unconcernedly.
"Based on that photo, I would have said you were a different sort of person than your father and brother described. In fact, when I first saw you in that cantina tonight, I would have said you were... Never mind. You're just not quite what I had imagined. Which only goes to show,"
he went on carelessly, examining the bed,
"how deceptive appearances can be."
"Somehow I get the impression your appearance isn't deceptive in the least," Honor gritted. "You look exactly like you seem to be. A cold, hard, inhuman man who's only interested in collecting his pay for this dirty little job."
"Now that we understand each other," he said smoothly, "let's get ready for bed, shall we? You don't have to look at me like that, you know. I'll be sleeping on the floor. That lumpy mattress doesn't look much more comfortable than these boards anyway. You're welcome to it."
Honor stood still beside the window, watching as Judd methodically confiscated a couple of the worn blankets and spread them out.
Sample complete. Ready to continue?